In the mirror, I noticed my own smile had started to fix in place, the corners of my mouth refusing to drop even as tears ran down my cheeks. The twins had warned me this would happen, their identical grins never faltering as they whispered, "It starts with a smile that won't go away." Boston, Massachusetts, 1927. The Westbrook Psychiatric Clinic stood at the edge of the city, a looming Victorian structure whose Gothic architecture seemed better suited to haunting nightmares than healing troubled minds. As the city modernized around it, Westbrook remained frozen in time, a throwback to an era when mental illness was still shrouded in mystery and superstition. You won't believe what I discovered about the twins that terrified even the most hardened scientists. Watch until the end. I was 28 years old when I first encountered the Blackwood twins. Fresh from my psychiatric residency at Johns Hopkins, one of the few institutions that accepted women into their medical program, I arrived at Westbrook eager to prove myself in a field dominated by men. My specialty was childhood psychological disorders, still a nascent field considered less prestigious than treating the wealthy adults who typically populated private institutions. Dr. Walter Pierce, Westbrook's aging director, greeted me with the patronizing smile I'd grown accustomed to from male colleagues. "Dr. Collins," he said, examining my credentials with exaggerated care, "while your academic record is impressive, I must warn you that theory rarely prepares one for the unique challenges of practical psychiatric work." "I've had practical experience at Johns Hopkins, Doctor." "Pierce," I replied, keeping my tone neutral despite my irritation. 3 years working directly with patients." Yes, he waved dismissively. "But Boston presents different sorts of cases. Old families, old money, old problems." He slid a thin folder across his mahogany desk. "Since you specialize in children, you can start with this case, the Blackwood twins, admitted 3 months ago." I opened the file to find 2 identical photographs paperclipped to the first page. 2 boys, perhaps 12 years old, with dark hair parted neatly to the side and unnervingly wide smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Edward and Edwin Blackwood," Pierce continued, "from one of Boston's oldest families. Their parents brought them to us after incidents at home. 3 physicians have already refused to continue working with them." "Refused? On what grounds?" Pierce shifted uncomfortably. "They found the boys disturbing. Dr. Harrison, their last physician, requested transfer to our geriatric ward after just 2 weeks, claimed the environment was affecting his health." I scanned the sparse notes in the file. The twins had exhibited unusual behavioral synchronicity and persistent facial affect inappropriate to stimuli. One note, hastily scribbled by Dr. Harrison, simply read, "They always smile, always, even in sleep." "What exactly happened at their home?" I asked. "The family has been discreet about specifics, servants leaving abruptly, a tutor who suffered some manner of nervous collapse. The parents speak only of unsettling behaviors and concerning incidents." Pierce stood, indicating our meeting was concluding. "You'll meet them tomorrow. Ward C, room 27. I suggest you prepare yourself, Dr. Collins." "Prepare myself how, exactly?" He paused at the door. "By remembering that sometimes what appears to be madness may be something else entirely." That night, in my small apartment overlooking the Charles River, I reviewed what little information the file contained. The twins had been developing normally until age 7, when they simultaneously developed high fevers following a family trip to Egypt. Their father, an amateur archaeologist, had taken them to some newly excavated tombs. After recovering, the boys began exhibiting synchronized behaviors, speaking in unison, mirroring each other's movements perfectly, and most notably, maintaining identical expressions regardless of circumstances. The file included a letter from their mother, written in an increasingly frantic hand. They smiled constantly now. Even when they broke their arms last winter, first Edwin, then Edward the very next day, in exactly the same place, they never stopped smiling. They smile in their sleep. I've checked, and the things they say. The letter ended abruptly, without elaboration on what things the boys said. I arrived at Westbrook early the next morning, eager to form my own impressions. The nurse who accompanied me to Ward C, a stern-faced woman named Greta, was unusually taciturn. "Have you worked with the Blackwood twins?" I asked as we walked through the quiet corridors. "I don't enter their room anymore," she replied curtly. "Neither do most of the staff." "May I ask why?" She stopped, fixing me with a hard stare. Dr. Harrison was not an unstable man, Dr. Collins. He'd worked with violent patients, with the criminally insane. Nothing disturbed him until those boys. She continued walking. He started smiling strangely after a week with them. Couldn't stop. Even when his wife telephoned about their son's accident, he kept smiling. Then he started whispering to himself. We reached room 27, an isolated room at the end of a long corridor. Unlike other rooms we'd passed, this one had a small observation window installed in the door at adult height. "And they're always awake, no matter when you come," Greta said, handing me the key. "I'll return in 1 hour. If you need assistance before then, ring the bell." She pointed to a call button beside the door, then added, almost reluctantly, "Try not to smile at them, Doctor." "Collins!" Before I could ask what she meant, she was already walking away, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. I peered through the observation window. The room contained 2 identical beds, 2 identical desks, and 2 identical boys sitting perfectly still in chairs facing the door. They wore matching blue pajamas, their hands folded identically in their laps, and they were smiling, wide, unwavering smiles that stretched their lips but left their eyes cold and observant. As if sensing my presence, they tilted their heads simultaneously at the exact same angle, their smiles never faltering. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door and entered. "Good morning, Edward and Edwin," I said, trying to sound confident and warm. "I'm Dr. Margaret Collins." "We know who you are," they responded in perfect unison, their voices creating an unsettling harmonic effect. "We've been waiting for you, Doctor." "Collins, have you?" I set my medical bag on a small table, trying not to show my discomfort at their synchronized speech. "Yes," said the boy on the left. "You're going to help us," continued the boy on the right. "Like the others tried to," they finished together. "I'd like to tell you apart," I said. "Which of you is Edward and which is Edwin?" They exchanged a glance, the first independent movement I'd seen, and their smiles seemed to widen fractionally. "I'm Edward," said the left twin. "I'm Edwin," said the right twin. But something in their eyes suggested they were lying, as if swapping identities was a game they played with new doctors. As I prepared to begin my assessment, I made a conscious effort to maintain a neutral expression. Remembering the nurse's strange warning, the twins noticed immediately, "You're not smiling, Doctor." "Collins," they said in unison, their heads tilting to the opposite side now. "Everyone smiles eventually." In the mirror, I noticed my own smile had started to fix in place, the corners of my mouth refusing to drop even as tears ran down my cheeks. The twins had warned me this would happen, their identical grins never faltering as they whispered, "It starts with a smile that won't go away." That night, I dreamed of an ancient temple where hundreds of identical smiling faces watched from the walls. In my notes, I found words written in my handwriting that I had no memory of writing. The smile spreads, the smile consumes, the smile reveals. My first session with the Blackwood twins lasted exactly 53 minutes. I know this because my watch stopped precisely at 10:53 a.m. though it had been functioning perfectly before I entered their room. When I later mentioned this to Nurse Greta, she merely nodded as if it confirmed something she already knew. Have you ever felt your expressions weren't entirely under your control? Share your experience in the comments. During that initial session, I attempted standard psychological assessments, but the twins defied conventional evaluation. They answered questions in perfect unison, their responses technically appropriate, yet somehow unsettling in their delivery. When I showed them ink blot cards, they tilted their heads at identical angles and gave the exact same interpretations, always innocuous images like butterflies or flowers, described with vocabulary far beyond their 12 years. "You're not writing down what we're really saying," Edward, or perhaps Edwin, remarked midway through the session. I looked up from my notes, startled. "What do you mean?" "You're writing what you expect to hear," said one. "Not what we're actually telling you," continued the other. "Look at your notes, Dr. Collins." They finished together. When I glanced down at my notepad, a chill ran through me. Instead of the clinical observations I thought I'd been recording, the page was filled with a single phrase, written over and over in what appeared to be my handwriting. "The smile spreads. The smile consumes. The smile reveals." I closed my notebook abruptly, fighting to maintain my professional composure. "That's enough for today," I said, gathering my materials with hands I forced not to tremble. "I'll return tomorrow." "We'll be waiting, Dr. Collins," they replied in unison, their smiles never wavering. "Oh, we're always waiting." As I reached the door, one of them spoke alone, the first time either had done so. "It's already beginning, you know." I turned back. "What's beginning?" They tilted their heads in opposite directions, their smiles somehow widening without any other facial muscles moving. "At the transfer," they said together, then fell silent, watching me with unblinking eyes until I left the room. That evening, I examined my notes again in the privacy of my apartment. The disturbing repeated phrase was gone, replaced by the clinical observations I believed I'd written during the session. Had I imagined it? The logical part of my mind suggested I had experienced a brief dissociative episode, not uncommon among physicians working with disturbing cases, yet something deeper, more instinctual, rejected this rational explanation. I found myself standing before my bathroom mirror, studying my reflection with unusual intensity. My face appeared normal, my expression appropriately concerned, but when I attempted to form a frown, I discovered an unsettling resistance around the corners of my mouth, as if the muscles there had stiffened. That night, I dreamed of an ancient temple where hundreds of identical smiling faces watched from the walls. Their eyes followed me as I walked down endless corridors, unable to find an exit. When I woke, sweating and disoriented, I instinctively reached for my notebook and recorded the dream. In the morning light, I found additional notes beneath my dream description, words written in my handwriting that I had no memory of writing. The smile spreads. The smile consumes. The smile reveals. I arrived at Westbrook earlier than necessary, driven by a compulsion to review the twins, complete medical records before our second session. The hospital archives were housed in the basement, a labyrinth of filing cabinets and shelves illuminated by bare bulbs that cast more shadows than light. The records clerk, an elderly man named Simmons, regarded me with surprise when I requested the complete Blackwood file. "Most of their records are restricted," he said, eyeing me suspiciously. I produced my staff credentials. Dr. Pierce assigned me to their case. "I need to see everything." Reluctantly, he unlocked a separate cabinet and extracted a much thicker file than the one Pierce had provided. "Sign here," he said, pushing a ledger toward me. "And these don't leave the archives." I took the file to a small reading desk in the corner. What I found inside disturbed me far more than the twins themselves. The Blackwoods had not been admitted 3 months ago, as Pierce had claimed, but nearly a year earlier. They had been examined by not 3, but 7 different physicians. Each doctor had treated them for approximately 2 weeks before requesting transfer or, in 3 cases, taking extended leave for nervous exhaustion. The most comprehensive notes came from their first physician, Dr. James Sullivan. His initial entries were precise and clinical, describing the twins' unusual synchronicity and fixed expressions as likely symptoms of a rare neurological condition. But as the dates progressed, his handwriting deteriorated and his observations became increasingly erratic. His final entry, dated 2 weeks after beginning treatment, contained just one sentence: "They're not smiling, they're feeding." Attached to Sullivan's notes was a memo indicating he had been transferred to Westbrook's own psychiatric ward after exhibiting symptoms of acute psychosis, including facial paralysis presenting as a fixed rictus and auditory hallucinations. He had been discharged 6 months later to the care of his family in Maine. A handwritten note from Pierce stated simply, "Sullivan incident classified, no further correspondence." The pattern repeated with each subsequent doctor. All began with scientific curiosity and objective analysis. All ended with deteriorating notes, references to smiles, and eventual psychiatric episodes of their own. Most telling was the report on Dr. Harrison, the twins' most recent physician before me. His final coherent notes described conducting an experiment. He had set up a motion picture camera to film the twins while they slept, hoping to document whether their expressions changed during unconsciousness. The film itself was missing from the records, but a transcription of Harrison's reaction upon viewing it remained. The smiles remained during sleep, but at precisely 3:17 a.m., both boys opened their eyes simultaneously while continuing to appear asleep. They turned their heads toward the camera and spoke in unison. The audio equipment failed to record their words, but I could read their lips. They said, "We see you, Dr. Harrison. Soon you'll smile too." Harrison had been found the next morning in the twins' room, sitting between their beds with a smile identical to theirs fixed on his face, whispering the now familiar phrase, "The smile spreads, the smile consumes, the smile reveals." I closed the file, my hands shaking. What had Pierce been thinking, assigning me to this case without warning? Why hadn't anyone mentioned the pattern of doctors experiencing psychiatric symptoms after treating the twins? As I returned the file to Simmons, I noticed something that had escaped my attention earlier, a small notation on the original admission form, written in faded pencil. Possible connection to Carstairs incident, 1898. "What's the Carstairs incident?" I asked Simmons. The old clerk's face paled slightly. "Endured before my time," he said tersely, "and not in these records. Where would I find information about it?" He hesitated, then scribbled something on a slip of paper. "Miskatonic University Library, Arkham, Special Collections. Ask for Dr. Armitage." He pressed the paper into my hand. "I wouldn't mention it here again if I were you." My second session with the twins was scheduled for 10 a.m., but I found myself hesitating outside their door. Through the observation window, I could see them sitting in the exact same positions as the day before, as if they hadn't moved at all in the intervening 24 hours. Their eyes were fixed on the door, anticipating my entrance. As I watched, they both raised their right hands and wiggled their fingers in a synchronized wave, acknowledging my presence, though they couldn't possibly see me through the small window. I took a deep breath and entered, determined to maintain scientific objectivity despite the disturbing information I'd uncovered. "Good morning, Edward and Edwin," I said, setting down my bag. "Good morning, Dr. Collins," they replied in unison. "Now, did you sleep well?" The question was innocent enough, but something in their tone suggested they already knew about my dream of the temple with watching faces. "I'd like to discuss your time in Egypt," I said, ignoring their question. "Your illness began after your family visited some tombs, correct?" For the first time, a flicker of something, surprise perhaps, passed behind their eyes, though their smiles never faltered. "Father shouldn't have read the inscription," said one. "Some doors shouldn't be opened," said the other. But once opened, they can never truly close," they finished together. "What inscription?" I pressed. "What doors?" They tilted their heads at identical angles, studying me with unnerving intensity. "You've noticed it already, haven't you?" they asked simultaneously. "The stiffness in your cheeks, the way your smile wants to linger." I forced myself not to touch my face, not to acknowledge the strange tension I'd been feeling in my facial muscles since our first meeting. "We're discussing your experience, not mine," I said firmly. But they're connected now," said the twin on the left, Edward, "if they'd been truthful about their identities." "The transfer has begun," continued Edwin. "Soon you'll understand everything," they concluded together. "What transfer? What will I understand?" Instead of answering, they began to hum, a discordant melody that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. As they hummed, I felt an overwhelming compulsion to smile, the corners of my mouth pulling upward against my will. I stood abruptly, gathering my notes. "That's all for today." They stopped humming, but continued to watch me with those cold, calculating eyes behind their fixed grins. "You'll go to Arkham next," said Edward. Or was it Edwin? "You'll learn about Carstairs," said the other. "But knowledge won't save you," they said together. "Nothing stops the smile once it starts." I froze, with my hand on the doorknob. I hadn't mentioned Carstairs or Arkham to them. There was no way they could know my intentions. "What are you?" I whispered, the question escaping before I could stop it. Their smiles widened to an impossible degree, stretching far beyond the natural limits of human facial muscles. "We're not the twins, Dr. Collins," they said, their voices suddenly deeper, resonating with an ancient timbre that made my bones vibrate. "We're what lives inside them. We're what will soon live inside you." That night I dreamed of an ancient temple where hundreds of identical smiling faces watched from the walls. In my notes, I found words written in my handwriting that I had no memory of writing. The smile spreads, the smile consumes, the smile reveals. The librarian's hands trembled as he placed the Carstairs file before me. "They called it the Smiling Plague," he whispered. "It began with 2 archaeologists who uncovered a sealed chamber in Egypt. Within weeks, hundreds were affected, unable to stop smiling, claiming to hear whispers, eventually turning on those who weren't yet. Changed. The journey to Arkham took just under an hour by train from Boston's North Station. The morning was unseasonably cold for early autumn, a dense fog clinging to the Massachusetts countryside like a funeral shroud. I spent the ride reviewing my notes on the Blackwood twins, though the words swam before my eyes, occasionally seeming to rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. Have you ever encountered something that science simply couldn't explain? Tell me about it in the comments. Miskatonic University stood on a hill overlooking the Miskatonic River, its Gothic architecture reminiscent of much older European institutions. The library occupied the center of campus, a massive stone building whose entrance was flanked by strange sculptures that seemed out of place for an academic setting, writhing forms that were neither fully human nor animal. The Special Collections Department was housed in the basement, accessible only through a heavy oak door requiring both a key and a written authorization. I had telephoned ahead, mentioning Simmons's referral and my interest in the Carstairs incident. Dr. Henry Armitage, the head librarian, had agreed to meet me, though his tone suggested reluctance. Armitage was older than I expected, well into his 70s, with sparse white hair and thick glasses that magnified his pale blue eyes. He greeted me with the wariness of someone accustomed to guarding dangerous knowledge. "Dr. Collins," he said, examining my credentials. "You're from Westbrook Psychiatric Clinic." "Yes, I'm treating a case that may have connections to the Carstairs incident." His expression darkened. "What sort of connections?" "Patients with fixed smiles, synchronous behavior, and references to some kind of transfer." Armitage removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I was afraid of this. Please follow me." He led me through rows of locked cabinets to a small reading room at the back of the collections department. After ensuring we were alone, he used a key from a chain around his neck to unlock a filing cabinet labeled Restricted Anthropological Phenomena. "The university officially disavows the contents of these files," he said, his voice low. "They're maintained purely as historical curiosities. Do you understand?" I nodded, though I didn't fully comprehend his concern. "The Carstairs incident isn't discussed in medical literature for a reason, Dr. Collins. The British and Egyptian authorities suppressed most documentation. What remains are personal accounts, newspaper clippings saved by private collectors, and a few official reports that escaped destruction." The librarian's hands trembled as he placed the Carstairs file before me. "They called it the Smiling Plague," he whispered. "It began with two archaeologists who uncovered a sealed chamber in Egypt. Within weeks, hundreds were affected, unable to stop smiling, claiming to hear whispers, eventually turning on those who weren't yet changed." The file contained numerous documents, including tattered journal pages, newspaper clippings from Egyptian and British papers, and several photographs. One image particularly caught my attention, a black and white photograph of a group of men and women standing before a temple entrance, all wearing identical unnatural smiles. Professor William Carstairs and his brother Robert led an expedition to the Dashur necropolis in 1897, Armitage explained. They discovered a previously unknown temple complex predating dynastic Egyptian civilization. The hieroglyphs they found didn't match any known ancient Egyptian writings. They were older, according to Carstairs' notes. I examined the journal pages, recognizing phrases that echoed my own experiences with the Blackwood twins. References to the transfer, the eternal smile, and most disturbingly, the exact phrase from my notes: "The smile spreads, the smile consumes." "The smile reveals what happened to the expedition members?" I asked, all affected by what locals called the smiling sickness. It began with the inability to form expressions other than smiles. Then came the whispering. Victims reported hearing voices instructing them to spread the condition to others. The final stage was complete personality transformation. A newspaper clipping from the Cairo Gazette described the Dashur incident in carefully sanitized terms. British authorities have quarantined the village of Dashur following an outbreak of an unidentified nervous disorder. Approximately 200 villagers and several European archaeologists have been isolated due to concerning behaviors of an undisclosed nature. Another document, this one bearing official British government seals, was more direct. The affected individuals demonstrate a hive-mind consciousness, acting in coordinated patterns without verbal communication. They actively seek to infect others through prolonged eye contact and physical touch. Most alarmingly, they exhibit no hostile intent until resistance is encountered, at which point they become single-minded in their efforts to subdue and convert the resistant individual. "How was it contained?" I asked, my mouth dry with apprehension. Armitage's expression grew grave. The official record states that a sudden outbreak of typhoid fever killed most of the affected individuals. Unofficially, he hesitated, then continued in a near whisper. "The British military sealed the village and burned it to the ground. The temple was dynamited and reburied. The survivors, those in early stages who could still pass as normal, were institutionalized in various facilities across Europe and America. My blood ran cold as the implications became clear. The Blackwood twins' father. He was an amateur archaeologist who took them to Egypt. Armitage nodded grimly. They did the same region, I presume. I don't know, the records don't specify. It hardly matters. If they encountered anything from that temple, an artifact, an inscription, it would be enough. He leaned forward, his voice urgent. Dr. Collins, have you experienced any symptoms yourself? Difficulty controlling facial expressions? Whispers when you're alone? Writing you don't remember producing? I hesitated, reluctant to admit the truth to this stranger, yet desperate for answers. Yes, I finally confessed. All of those. He closed the file abruptly. Then you're already in the early stages of infection. Infection? You make it sound like a disease. Perhaps it is, in a way. Not bacterial or viral, but something else entirely. A contagion of consciousness. The notes of Dr. Miles Spencer, who studied survivors of the Dasha incident, theorized that it's a form of psychic parasite. It begins by establishing control over motor functions related to expression, then progresses to thought patterns, and finally, complete personality replacement. That's not scientifically possible, I protested, though my conviction was weakening by the second. Science has limits, Dr. Collins. Some phenomena exist beyond our current understanding. Armitage retrieved another document from the file. This is Spencer's final report before his own infection and subsequent suicide. He identified 3 stages of progression. The report described exactly what I'd been experiencing. First, the fixed smile and occasional loss of muscular control. Second, auditory and visual hallucinations coupled with automatic writing and periods of lost time. Third, complete personality sublimation and active participation in spreading the infection. How far has it progressed with the twins? Armitage asked. They're fully in the 3rd stage, I believe. They act as a single entity, finish each other's sentences, and seem to know things they couldn't possibly know. And you're in the 1st stage, transitioning to the 2nd. He studied my face intently. Your smile is becoming more pronounced even as we speak, Dr. Collins. I touched my cheeks, horrified to find them aching from a smile I hadn't consciously formed. Is there a cure? I asked, struggling to relax my facial muscles. Spencer documented only one successful intervention, complete isolation of the infected individual before the 3rd stage, combined with a regimen of electroconvulsive therapy. The theory was that the electrical current disrupted the parasite's hold on the nervous system. My medical training rebelled against this primitive approach, yet I found myself considering it seriously. And the twins, if they're fully in the 3rd stage... Armitage's expression was answer enough, but he verbalized it anyway. Beyond recovery, they're no longer the Blackwood children in any meaningful sense. They're vessels for something else now, something ancient and patient that has been attempting to establish itself in our world for millennia. What is it? What's inside them? Spencer called it the Smiling God. A consciousness from elsewhere that feeds on human fear and spreads through mimicry. The temple at Dashur was built to contain it, not worship it. The ancient people who constructed it understood its nature. The warning inscriptions Carstairs translated read, "That which waits behind the smile must remain sealed, lest it claim all faces as its own." As Armitage spoke, I felt a strange doubling of my consciousness. Part of me listened with academic interest, while another part whispered that he was wrong, dangerous, an obstacle to the glorious transfer that would bring joy eternal. I shook my head violently, trying to dislodge the alien thoughts. "It's progressing quickly in you," Armitage observed with clinical detachment. faster than Spencer documented in most cases, perhaps because you've had direct contact with fully manifested vessels. What should I do? I asked, hearing the desperation in my voice. Don't return to Westbrook. The infection has likely spread beyond the twins. Check yourself into another facility, one with electroconvulsive capabilities, under an assumed name. Leave detailed instructions about your condition with someone trustworthy. And the twins, Armitage hesitated. Spencer's notes suggest only one solution for fully manifested vessels, which is permanent quarantine in a facility equipped to handle them, somewhere isolated, with staff rotated frequently to prevent complete infection. He paused. There's an island facility off the Maine coast, Ravenscroft Sanitarium. It was established specifically for Dachshund survivors. I gathered the documents, my mind racing. I need copies of these. Impossible. These never leave the archives. Seeing my expression, Armitage relented slightly. You may take notes, but be circumspect. If this consciousness is as perceptive as Spencer believed, it may be able to access your memories and thoughts as the infection progresses. For the next hour, I frantically copied the most relevant information, fighting against the increasing stiffness in my facial muscles and the whispers that grew louder in my mind. By the time I finished, my handwriting had deteriorated noticeably, and twice I found myself writing that familiar phrase without conscious intention. The smile spreads, the smile consumes, the smile reveals. As I prepared to leave, Armitage placed a hand on my arm. One more thing, Dr. Collins. Spencer noted that in the later stages, the infected become extremely sensitive to their reflection. They're drawn to mirrors, but simultaneously disturbed by what they see, or perhaps what looks back at them. On the train back to Boston, I avoided looking at the window, fearful of catching my reflection in the glass. Instead, I reviewed my hastily scribbled notes, formulating a plan. I couldn't return to Westbrook. Armitage was right about that. But I also couldn't abandon my responsibility to understand and document what was happening with the twins. I needed to see them one more time to confirm my suspicions and gather final observations before seeking treatment for myself. It was a dangerous gamble, but my scientific training demanded conclusive evidence. As the train pulled into North Station, I felt a sudden, overwhelming compulsion to look at my reflection. I resisted, but my head turned against my will toward the window. What I saw made my blood freeze, my face smiling that terrible fixed smile, but behind me, clearly visible though there was no one sitting in the adjacent seat, were the Blackwood twins, their identical grins wider than humanly possible. I jerked away from the window, turning to confirm I was alone in my row. The twins weren't physically present, yet when I reluctantly looked back at the reflection, there they were, now standing directly behind me, their hands reaching for my shoulders. "We see you, Dr. Collins," I heard their voices in my mind. "We're waiting for your return. The transfer is nearly complete." The librarian's hands trembled as he placed the Carstairs file before me. "They called it the Smiling Plague," he whispered. It began with 2 archaeologists who uncovered a sealed chamber in Egypt. Within weeks, hundreds were affected, unable to stop smiling, claiming to hear whispers, eventually turning on those who weren't yet changed. My reflection in the mirror no longer moves when I do. It watches me, smiling that terrible smile, while I frantically write these final notes as a warning. I can still see the twins standing behind my reflection, their hands now resting on my shoulders, though I'm alone in this room. "We are legion," they whisper. "Oh, and soon we will all be smiling." Against all rational judgment, I returned to Westbrook the next morning. My scientific mind, what remained of it that wasn't clouded by whispers and compulsions, insisted that I document the twins, condition one final time before seeking treatment for myself. I told myself it was for medical posterity, but deep down, I recognized the parasite's influence, guiding me back to its primary vessels. Have you ever felt something inside you that wasn't you? Something trying to take control? Share your experience in the comments. The clinic seemed unnaturally quiet as I made my way towards C. The few staff members I encountered wore strange, fixed smiles that mirrored my own. They nodded at me with an unsettling familiarity, as if we shared a secret understanding. Perhaps we did. Outside room 27, I hesitated. Through the observation window, I could see the twins sitting in their usual positions, facing the door expectantly. As I watched, they raised their hands in perfect synchronization and beckoned me inside, their smiles wider than ever. I entered, clutching my notebook like a shield, though I knew it offered no protection against what was happening. "Welcome back, Dr. Collins," they said in unison. "You've learned about Carstairs." It wasn't a question. Of course they knew where I'd been. "Yes," I admitted, seeing no point in denial. "I know what you are, or rather what's inside you." "Not inside," corrected one twin. "We are it," said the other. "And soon you will be too," they finished together. "The smiling god," I said, determined to maintain clinical detachment despite the growing pressure behind my own smile. "A psychic parasite that spreads through mimicry." They laughed, a harmonized sound that seemed to contain more voices than just two. "Such limited terminology," they said. "We are not a parasite. We are a collective consciousness, a unity that has existed since before humans walked upright. We don't take, we incorporate. We don't infect, we enlighten." "You replace people's personalities with your own," I countered. "You steal their autonomy." "We free them from isolation," they replied, their voices taking on a resonant, multi-layered quality. "Humans suffer from the illusion of separateness. We offer connection, perfect understanding, perfect unity." As they spoke, I felt the whispers in my mind growing louder, more persuasive. The sensation of something moving behind my thoughts, rearranging, reprioritizing, intensified. "The Egyptian temple," I said, struggling to focus. "It was built to contain you." "To contain one manifestation," they corrected. "We exist in many places, many times. The temple was merely one door among many." And the Blackwood twins, the original Edward and Edwin. A shadow of something, perhaps annoyance, flickered across their identical expressions. "Still here," said one, tapping his temple. "Watching," said the other. "Screaming," they added together, their smiles never faltering. A chill ran through me. The real children were still conscious somewhere inside, aware of what was happening but powerless to stop it. Was that my fate as well? To become a passenger in my own body, watching helplessly as this entity used me to spread itself further? "It doesn't have to be unpleasant, Dr. Collins," they said, reading my thoughts. The transition is difficult only for those who resist. Accept the smile, embrace the unity." I found myself swaying slightly, the whispers in my mind now a chorus of voices promising peace, connection, and an end to the isolation of individual consciousness. For a moment, it seemed appealing to surrender, to join, to smile eternally. With tremendous effort, I pulled myself back from the brink. "No," I said firmly. "I've seen what you do, what you are." Their expressions didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "You've seen only what your limited perception allows," they said. "Let us show you more." Before I could react, they were standing directly in front of me, though I hadn't seen them move. Each took one of my hands in theirs, their skin unnaturally cold and dry. The moment they touched me, my consciousness expanded violently. I saw, felt, experienced thousands of minds connected across time and space, all sharing the same collective awareness. I glimpsed ancient temples, modern cities, faces from every era and culture, all wearing that same eternal smile. I sensed the entity's true nature, vast, ancient, patient, and utterly alien to human understanding. Most terrifyingly, I felt myself being absorbed into this collective, my individual identity dissolving like salt in water. The barriers between Margaret Collins and the entity blurred, then began to collapse entirely. With the last remnant of my individual will, I tore my hands from the twins' grasp and stumbled backward. The connection broke, leaving me gasping and disoriented, but still myself mostly. The twins remained where they stood, watching me with identical expressions of amused patience. "It's too late, Dr. Collins," they said. "The transfer is nearly complete. By tomorrow you'll be fully incorporated, one of us, and together we'll bring more into the smile." I fled the room, my legs carrying me through the corridors of Westbrook on instinct alone. My mind was chaos, part of me screaming to escape, another part urging me to return to the twins, to complete the transfer, to surrender to the smile. I don't clearly remember leaving the clinic or making my way back to my apartment. My first coherent memory is standing before my bathroom mirror, examining my reflection with detached fascination. My smile had transformed completely, now identical to the twins, wide, unnatural, and disconnected from the terror in my eyes. But more disturbing was what I saw behind me in the mirror, the twins standing shoulder to shoulder, though I knew I was alone in my bathroom. "We're always with you now," they said, their voices clear despite existing only in the reflection. "Part of you, as you are becoming part of us." I spent that night fighting against the entity's growing control, focusing on documenting everything I'd learned and experienced. The act of writing seemed to temporarily strengthen my sense of self, pushing back against the collective consciousness attempting to absorb me. By morning, I had formulated a desperate plan. I would travel to Ravenscroft Sanitarium in Maine, the facility Armitage had mentioned. If anyone could help me, they would be there. I packed a small bag, including my notes and the contact information for Dr. Armitage. As I prepared to leave, I made the mistake of glancing at the mirror one final time. My reflection no longer mimicked my movements. While I stood frozen in horror, it continued moving independently, reaching out as if the mirror were a window rather than a reflective surface. Its fingers seemed to press against the glass from the other side, leaving impressions that distorted the surface like ripples in water. Then, impossibly, its hand began to emerge from the mirror. I fled my apartment, leaving everything behind except the notes clutched in my trembling hands. I went directly to the telegraph office and sent urgent messages to both Dr. Armitage at Miskatonic and the director of Ravenscroft Sanitarium, explaining my situation and begging for immediate assistance. While waiting for replies, I checked into a small hotel under a false name, avoiding the room's mirror by covering it with a bedsheet. I spent hours transcribing my experiences and research into a cohesive document, the very account you are reading now. It's becoming increasingly difficult to write. My hand wants to form other words, invitations, enticements, instructions for spreading the smile. The whispers are now a constant chorus, and I frequently lose time, coming back to awareness to find myself standing before the covered mirror, slowly removing the sheet. The hotel staff have begun to avoid my room. I caught a glimpse of the maid's face when she brought fresh towels, the momentary horror as she saw my fixed smile, followed by the first twitching of her own lips as the mimicry began. I received a telegram from Ravenscroft this afternoon. They're sending people to collect me, but they won't arrive until tomorrow morning. I fear that will be too late. The transfer is accelerating rapidly. There have been moments today when I wasn't Margaret Collins at all, when the entity controlled me completely. I came back to myself once to find I'd written dozens of letters, each addressed to a different psychiatric institution across the country, each containing detailed instructions for treatment, of patients that would actually spread the condition. I burned them all, but I can't be certain I didn't send others during my blackouts. I've barricaded the hotel room door and wedged chairs under the handles, not to keep others out, but to keep myself in. I can't trust my own actions anymore. The Margaret Collins writing these words is just a fragmentary consciousness now, a dwindling island of identity in a rising sea of smiles. My reflection in the mirror no longer moves when I do. It watches me, smiling that terrible smile, while I frantically write these final notes as a warning. I can still see the twins standing behind my reflection, their hands now resting on my shoulders, though I'm alone in this room. "We are legion," they whisper. "And soon, we will all be smiling." If you're reading this, the entity has likely taken full control of me. The real Margaret Collins is gone or imprisoned within her own mind. What wears her face now is just another vessel for the smiling god, another vector for its spread. The only mercy is that I've managed to hide these notes where my controlled body hasn't found them. Perhaps they'll be discovered after I'm taken to Ravenscroft. Perhaps they'll help the staff there understand what they're dealing with. I leave these final instructions for anyone encountering the entity. Never maintain eye contact with the infected. Never touch them directly. Avoid mirrors or reflective surfaces when in their presence. If you notice yourself smiling without conscious intent, seek isolation immediately. The entity can be weakened by electroconvulsive therapy in early stages. Most importantly, if you encounter the Blackwood twins, or whatever now wears the face of Margaret Collins, remember that what you're seeing isn't human anymore. It's a facade, a mask worn by something ancient and patient that exists only to spread, to consume, to convert. And it never stops smiling. Editor's note: the preceding document was found hidden in a ventilation duct in room 212 of the Prescott Hotel in Boston, discovered during renovations in 1956. Dr. Margaret Collins was admitted to Ravenscroft Sanitarium on October 3, 1927, where she remains to this day, classified as a Category 3 containment case. The Blackwood twins were transferred to the same facility 1 week after Dr. Collins. All three are kept in isolated wings and are never permitted mirrors or reflective surfaces. Ravenscroft Sanitarium continues to monitor several dozen similar cases worldwide, all traced back to archaeological expeditions to specific sites in Egypt, Cambodia, and Peru between 1897 and 1939. All known artifacts from these sites have been secured in lead-lined containers at an undisclosed location. The Westbrook Psychiatric Clinic was destroyed by fire in December 1927. Official records attribute the incident to faulty electrical wiring, though unofficial accounts note that all 47 staff members and patients who survived the fire exhibited the characteristic fixed smile of what is now classified as mimetic consciousness displacement syndrome. This document is classified under the Miskatonic Protocol. Unauthorized reading is strictly prohibited. If you have encountered this file in error, please report for psychological evaluation immediately. If you want to hear more whispers from the darkness, follow this channel. The next story may be closer than you think. My reflection in the mirror no longer moves when I do. It watches me, smiling that terrible smile, while I frantically write these final notes as a warning. I can still see the twins standing behind my reflection, their hands now resting on my shoulders, though I'm alone in this room. "We are legion," they whisper, "and soon we will all be smiling."